This is the introduction to the orchestra, and my goal is for you to become more familiar with the instruments that are part of the orchestra so that that knowledge can be applied to units that we do later on this school year. So, what makes this orchestra so special? Well, part of it is history, part of it's science, and part of it's just amazingness. So the history of an orchestra is that it's been around for quite some time. Obviously, you guys have studied that there's been instruments since Genesis. But this particular modern, we call it modern orchestra, these instruments have been around since the 17th century. That's also known as the 1600s. Most of these instruments, in way, shape, or form, have been part of the modern orchestra since that time. Now, what's the difference between an orchestra and a band? Some of you guys have gone to football games and you're like, well, I see a band every week. Well, an orchestra has a strings section, and we're going to get into that later on. But also, most bands, they have to be able to move around. If you've ever seen them on a football field or parade route, they have to carry their instruments pretty far pieces. Orchestras, they sit, and they don't move. They stay put. And there's some very large instruments, and we're going to get into those later on, but I wanted to explain the difference between an orchestra and a band. Why are the instruments in this particular order or this particular plan in this semicircle? Well, it's partially history and partially science. History, you'll remember, electricity hasn't been around in the grand scheme of things very long. There has not been amplification through microphones available. So they had to use science, which meant the instruments that were naturally louder, they needed to go toward the back. I mean, you know, when you whisper something, you need to be closer to it. So the instruments that are quieter are toward the front. So that's the reason why you have louder instruments in the back, quieter instruments in the front. Now, keep in mind, might be able to, this might help your brain thinking. For example, this is a specific orchestra seating plan. It's this way for a reason. Think about a football team. You have an offensive line that protects the quarterback. If that offensive line weren't there, the quarterback would continue to get sacked, or if they're a really stinky team and they're not a good line, but I digress. Or think about a goalie in a soccer team. A goalie doesn't leave the box, or if they leave the box, they hurry and get back to it because they can't leave the goal unattended. So there's a specific plan. You have the strikers in the front, midfield, and then the defenders, and then the goalie. It's the same kind of idea. This is how it works best for most success. This orchestra seating plan is how it works best for the best sound. Can you think of an analogy or an example that you would use that would help you think connection? All right. So anyway, we're going to move on ahead. There are 4 instrument families in the orchestra. You can think of it this way. Think of your family. What are some things that you have in common? Maybe it's your hair color is all the same color. Maybe you all like anchovies on your pizza. Oh, not me, but that's okay. Maybe you all have the same last name. Whatever it is that your family has in common, most likely there's something in your family, the people that live in your house that you have in common. And so it's different from the people who live across the street. They have certain things in common. And so that's what I like to compare the instruments of the orchestra. It's kind of like a neighborhood. You have one family in one house, another family in another house, and those families, individual families, though they're part of the same neighborhood, they have qualities that are consistent to their family, that are common to their family. So the first family is the strings family, and something that makes the strings special is that they all have strings. That's what they have in common. They all have strings. You have to play a stringed instrument with either a bow, and we'll get into this later, or you use your hands to pluck. I want you to hear what they sound like. All right, now we move on to the woodwinds family. The woodwinds family, they got their name because they were originally made of wood. Not many nowadays are made of wood just because it's more expensive to actually make them from wood. But they were originally made that way. And you also used wind to play them, wind from your lungs. So the woodwind family, that's their group, and they're right there in the middle. They're not quite as soft as the strings family, but they are a softer group, and here is their sound. The brass family, they're loud. That's why they're further to the back. They're just naturally loud, and we'll talk specifics about the makeup of their instruments and everything later. But brass instruments are made of metal. That contributes to them being loud as well. But you have to buzz your lips, and we'll get into this later on exactly what that means. But you must buzz your lips to play a brass instrument. Let's listen to them. All right, now we'll move to our final family. This is the percussion family. Percussion instruments must be struck. You strike them, you shake them, or you scrape them to make the sound. Now, in addition, percussion instruments can be tuned, which means they can do different notes, they can make a melody, or untuned. They're just going to play the same sound over and over. Again, we'll discuss this more in detail, but I want you to hear. All right. Now, the instruments are grouped together in families because they're made from similar materials, they look similar to each other, or they produce their sounds in the same way. They're played in the same way. Now, there's a final person that's pretty important to our orchestra. That's the conductor. The conductor is the person who directs the orchestra. It can be a man or a woman, doesn't matter. They indicate the tempo, the dynamics, and the style, and they use this little baton when they direct the group. Now, some of you may be confusing the name composer with conductor. Two different words. Composer creates the music. Conductor leads the music. Now, I want to do one last thing before we close for the day. Now, I want you to hear the same song with the different families, and they're organized in the colors. That way you can see them. The first is the strings family. All right, next is our woodwinds family. Remember, they're made of wood originally, and you use wind to play them. All right, our next family is the brass family. And we talked about this one, that they're made of metal and you have to buzz your lips. I look forward to talking to you guys about that one. That one's going to be quite fun. But I want you to see what that's like. You're hearing the same song over and over, the different sections. Here's the percussion instruments. now we put them all together, and this is what they sound like. They are led by the conductor. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our orchestra.